I want to welcome you all to our Vernal Pool virtual tour out here at Grasslands Regional Park. I'm Sabrina Britt. I am with Yolo Basin Foundation. You can see that on my shirt there. And with Yolo Basin Foundation, we are the nonprofit that provides educational opportunities surrounding the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area. That sits just under the Yolo Causeway and is between, it is the wetlands between Davis and West Sacramento. So many of you may have driven over that several times. If you're from out of town, we welcome you and we invite you to come up here to explore this area. These are beautiful wetlands that provide flood control for our surrounding communities. They are there for agricultural purposes. Rice is grown out there. They're there for wildlife viewing and human recreation and conservation of the wildlife that are out there. We have a partnership with Yolo County Parks and Recreation through a habitat conservation grant fund. And so we are working with them to provide educational opportunities out here at Grasslands Regional Park as well. Out here at Grasslands Regional Park, we can pull up a map for you. We have our moderator at home, Gabrielle, who will be complimenting what you see out here with images. And we can pull up that map of Grasslands Regional Park so people have an idea of where we're located. So we are just a little southwest, about 3.5 miles southwest of the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area. And we can pull up the next map, which shows a little closer look. Out here at Grasslands Regional Park, which is right off the intersection of Mace Boulevard and Tremont, there's a parking lot there where you can access 2 archery ranges. You can access walking trails from there for bird watching out in the grasslands. They do get you close to the vernal pools, but the vernal pools, which we're going to learn more about tonight, are protected habitat. And so they are gated. You can clearly see those with the gates that are out here. And we are bringing those to the vernal pools tour to you so that you can access it with us this evening. Since we are not able to take people in small groups at this time through the vernal pools with permission. We hope to have that permission next year and bring you out here in person so that you can see these vernal pools. At Grasslands Regional Park, there are other accessible features. If you have dogs in the family, there is a large dog park with there's another parking lot to access that just a little further south from the one I mentioned at Tremont and Mace Boulevard. There are also walking trails out from there. There are picnic tables and gazebos. And you can even see a lot of beautiful upland and grassland flowers as you walk through those trails. We can see Swainson's hawks out here. We see a lot of wildlife out here, which Catherine, our speaker tonight, may touch on a little bit tonight about the other animals that are around the vernal pools. If you have questions tonight, you can send your questions in through the chat feature. So at the bottom of your Zoom screen, if you're familiar, you probably know where to go. If you're a little less familiar, just go to the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're on a computer, if you're on an iPad, it might pop up at the top. And find that little bubble that looks like a little bubble from a comic, a little square, the line at the bottom, and it says chat. And you can click on that, and there's a little drop-down menu. Make sure you select to send your questions to our moderator. So it'll say moderator co-host, and that's Gabrielle at home, who will be taking your questions. And at the end of our talk tonight with Catherine, she will field those questions or read them to Catherine for you, so Catherine can answer the questions you have throughout our time together this evening. Before I turn it over to Catherine, I also want to mention that I have Marge with me, who is our videographer, so she's behind the camera. And we've got a great team, and we're excited to share the vernal pools with you this evening. Catherine Severson is our tour guide. She is one of our volunteers out here at Yolo Basin Foundation. She has had a wealth of knowledge of nature because she's been immersed in nature since she was a child. She has a love of nature and a passion. That's why she's here with us, and she's happy to share that with you this evening. She is also Cal Naturalist certified, and she is a nurse by trade for the state, a nurse practitioner. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Catherine.
Greetings and welcome to our final virtual tour of the Grasslands Regional Park Vernal Pools. My hope for you all is that at the end of this virtual tour, you'll walk away with a greater appreciation and understanding of this very unique habitat and some of the plants and animals that make it their home. I do want to let you all know, however, that we are being stalked by 2 sheep. I don't think we're in any danger, but just so that you all at home know that. This evening, I'm going to take the approach of looking at vernal pools from the broad perspective and then narrowing down to the grass level, and finally, time permitting, we'll venture into the pools themselves. What is a vernal pool? Those of you who have heard some of these talks before may already know. But if we unpack the words, vernal means spring, and pool is a small body of water, generally without water flowing into it or out of it. Vernal pools have a short wet period when rainfall occurs, long, many months period of dry and desiccated. Vernal pools are found worldwide. Most of them are in the area that constitutes a Mediterranean climate where there's a short, wet growing season in winter, followed by the many months of the long, hot summer. So we find that climate not only in California, but also in South America, Chile, around the Mediterranean Basin, in Australia, and of course in California. But I didn't know until I heard this from Eva Butler on an earlier talk that vernal pools are also found in the northeastern and the midwestern part of the United States. They look a bit different there, and they're found more in woodlands. They have more amphibians who use them for their eggs, and certainly different plant communities than we have out here. So if the moderator could show us slide number 11, which shows a vernal pool depression. And as we look across, too windy today to do this here today, but as you see that slide, you'll see that there's a depression in the ground with slightly raised edges. And that's what it's looking like here for us today, the vernal pool at the dry period. Let's talk about the geology of the vernal pool. What are some of the essential characteristics of a vernal pool? So that would be slide 12. And as you can see on the slide there, there's an impermeable layer. Water cannot go through that layer. On top of the layer is perched the water table, and then on top of that, the soil with the natural undulations. Now in California, we have great geological diversity. So the impermeable layer in California, depending on where the pool is located, may be made up of volcanic mud or granitic component, or in Grasslands Regional Park in Jepson's Prairie, where we are in this area now, it's made up of clay. How does the vernal pool occur? Well, the winter rains come, and we'll be going through some of these pictures later on, but the winter rains come, and they have nowhere to go. The water can't percolate through that impermeable layer, so the water table rises and fills up the depressions that we saw just a moment ago. The areas between the depressions, those slight elevations, become the uplands, and you get a different series of plants that grow there. The pools are rather shallow, just a few inches, and the uplands may only be 12 or 14 inches above the pool. Not a lot when you compare it to climbing mountains, but it is a lot, and those differences are very important for the communities that live around a vernal pool. what the substrate is made of, or what the impermeable layer is made of, has an impact on the water quality, the clarity, and the acidity or alkalinity of the pool. For those of you who have visited Mather Field, you recall the water there is fairly clear. We can see all of the little critters swimming around and the plants at the bottom of the pool. The substrate there is somewhat different than here at Grasslands Regional Park. The pools here, because it's on a clay layer, are rather turbid, muddy, and it's much more alkaline rather than acidic water, and that determines different what types of plants can grow there. Slides 14 and 15 show us the variation in the size of vernal pools. They may be small, the size of your kitchen, and 14 shows there's not a lot of shallow shoulder coming up out of the pool. Or they may be large, as we see in slide 15, and extend over a very large area. Here in Grasslands Regional Park, in the part of the park that we're working from tonight, there are 5 pools. In another part of the park, there are another 5 pools, and they're perhaps medium-sized pools. The diversity of plants in California is again due to the diversity in the geological formations and the water characteristics. There's over 200 species of plants that live in the vernal pools in California. Some of them live elsewhere. For those of you who are from California, you have seen blue dicks elsewhere other than in vernal pools. However, only about 100 of those over 200 plants are found only in California vernal pools. In other words, they're endemic to the area. Some of the plants are not rare at all. They may be found throughout the state. Some of the plants may be rare throughout the state, and some of the plants are locally rare. If we contrast this with Chile, they have about 20 species in their vernal pools. Excuse me a minute. So a vernal pool is an ephemeral pool. It's here for a short period of time. It has a short wet phase, followed by a very long dry phase, which may extend for years. This leads to the need for the plants and the animals living there to develop some very specialized adaptations. We'll talk about those in a little bit. Right now, I'd like to take you through some pictures looking at the seasons of a vernal pool, the stages of it. Not all of these pictures are from Grasslands. Some are. Some of them are from Mather. Some of them may be from Jepson Prairie near here, and some of them may be from other places in the state. However, they do demonstrate what we'll be talking about. This year was very dry. This year was a very dry year, so we did not have a lot of flowers blooming in this particular area. Start with slide 16, which show both 16 and 19 show us the wet season of the vernal pool. Starting with when the rains first come, we can see that the depressions are filling up. There are still some elevations. And moving on to 19, slide 19, again, we see the winter progressing. As the water evaporates, as we see in slide 18, we start to see the blooms emerging. And in slide 20, as the water continues to evaporate, we have an increase in the variety and in the colors of the flowers. Slide 21 shows us the picture the epitome of a vernal pool, and this one is from Matherfield, east of us here, with the ribbons of color. If you've never had a chance to go out there during the springtime when there's flowers, I strongly recommend it. Slides 23 and 24 show what Grasslands Regional Park vernal pools look like in the spring. We don't have quite the variety of colors and flower species here. By the time we get to late spring, as in slide 25, the rings of flowers have gone and the seeds are dropped. Slide 22, if we were to look closely down at the ground in late spring, we would see the cracks in the clay for the pools that are above clay, and the fading gold fields. And we'll talk more about gold fields. They have a very unique relationship with their pollinators. Moving on to summer, slide 26, the grasses are taking over. The color is more of a sepia golden tone. And in slide 27, the water is definitely long gone. Slide 28 is what I would expect to see this year in the not too distant future when we see all of the cracks in the clay. And then we come to fall in slide 29, and the cycle starts anew as the rains come. Let's hope so. Slide 17 is probably a good image of what we see now. Many sepia tones in our landscape. But there's a lot of activity going on and a lot of beautiful things to see, regardless of the time of year. We've started with a very broad perspective, talking about what is a vernal pool, where do we find it, what are the seasons of them, talking about the required elements and the diversity in California. Now we're going to move to the ground to get up close and personal with some of the plants that we can still see at this time of year. As I mentioned, due to the geological diversity in California, we have over 200 plant species. We're only going to look at maybe 4 or 5 of them, but we do have slides of others that we'll get to. Because of the unique characteristics of the vernal pool, short wet growing season in the winter, followed by the long hot dry season, and who knows when the next wet season is going to come. This is the cycle of the vernal pools over the centuries, and the plants and animals that live there have developed some very specialized strategies for survival. And again, we'll talk about some of those shortly. Some of the more specific ones. In general, some of these strategies are to have very large, showy flowers with very short stems and leaves. The purpose of the flower is to reproduce. The leaves don't really do too much to help it reproduce and set seed. And the big showy flowers help attract the pollinators. Here I am, come and get it. That's not true of all of the flowers, but certainly of some. The seeds are dropped right at the base of the flower. There's no need to spread the seed like a milkweed pod does and spread it over acres. The seed would land in places that are totally unsuitable. So the apple grows when it's dropped right underneath the tree. So does the seed. And then some of the plants have developed some very unique pollination strategies with some of the bees. We're going to start with one of the plants that has developed some strategies to allow it to start to grow underwater. We're going to look at the Coyote Thistle first. The Coyote Thistle starts to grow fairly early in the spring underwater. Now, I'm used to seeing Coyote Thistle out at Mather Field, and it just looked like a little green stick coming up out of the water. But it's important for the plant to get oxygen to its roots. We found one that was blooming. They are a late bloomer. The Coyote Thistle is not a thistle. It's actually a member of the carrot family, disguising itself as a thistle, I would say. So back to its strategy of growing in the water. The first leaves that come up are cylindrical and hollow so that they can bring air down to the roots. As the season progresses, the appearance changes. And the leaves become fleshier, thicker, they protrude more, and they develop those spikes. The Coyote Thistle is a late blooming plant, which is what we're seeing here. You can see its little yellow flower. Okay. And perhaps if the moderator could show the slides of the Coyote Thistle. Okay. What's our next one? Purple. Let's take another look at slide 21, where we're looking again at the rings. I talked about that as the pool dries, the flowers start to blossom. And you see the rings of colors. Each ring is at a slightly different elevation and a slightly different species of flower. All the flowers of one species bloom all at once to maximize their pollination potential. They all, as I said, they all bloom at one elevation. Many of the flowers are pollinated by specialist bees. We're going to look at goldfields here, and we'll take a look with the iPad first, and then perhaps the moderator could show the slides. We no longer have the yellow of the goldfields, but what is left are the beautiful calyces, the beautiful things that surround the petals. If you can see, they have a very delicate, symmetrical appearance. And where we're standing, the ground is covered with these. You can imagine how beautiful and golden it would have been in the springtime. So perhaps the moderator could show the two slides of the goldfields when they're at their peak. So the goldfield is pollinated by a very special bee called a miner bee, because they dig down into the soil. These are solitary bees about the size of a housefly, and as I said, they live in the ground dwelling. They emerge shortly before the flower blooms in early spring, say March or so. The males emerge first, then the females. They mate, the male goes off to die, and the female carries on with the business of provisioning for her young, for her eggs. female digs a tunnel about 4 or 5 inches deep and maybe a quarter or half inch around. And if you look in the soil around vernal pools, you may see some of these holes. She collects the pollen and nectar and creates a ball in the brood chamber. The brood chamber is an offshoot of that central tunnel. She lays one egg on that ball of pollen and then seals the brood chamber. And I don't know how they managed to see this, but she seals it with a little spiral of very tiny balls of dirt. I would love to see that. So she repeats this. She goes back out and gets more pollen and nectar and continues on laying eggs, each one on a ball of pollen. She may, in good years, have 30 eggs that she's laid and provisioned. In bad years, it may be less than 10. Now, what is also fascinating about this, the egg goes on to hatch. And as a young being, as all of us know, they're ravenous. So it eats the pollen ball completely over the course of the spring. And then rests during the summer, just hangs out. I don't know if it gets Wi-Fi down there or not, who knows. But it hangs out until it pupates or changes into an adult in the fall, approximately October. Now the adult doesn't do anything much either. It also hangs out until the spring. So the majority of this bee's life is spent underground and waiting for those first blooms to emerge in the spring. As the flowers are emerging, the bees are coming out and the cycle begins. The bees may need to wait several years underground if there's not a bloom. If there's only a small number of flowers blooming, we see only a few number of bees. And the reverse is true. If there are a large number of flowers, we see a lot more of the bees. The eggs don't all hatch the year following they're laid. Some of them may delay hatching or delay, not hatching, but delay emerging for several years. So you're spreading out your genetic material over several years, not putting all of your eggs, as it were, in one basket. We move on to the Downingias, slides 39 and 40. We have, and 47 and 48, we have two Downingias that grow in the vernal pools here. One is the cupped Downingia, and there are a couple of pictures of that. As you can see, it has some of its reproductive parts make a little, like a shower head coming over the flower. This one is also pollinated by specialist bees, and I assume it has a very similar life cycle. It's a separate bee. The other Downingia that grows here is the flat-faced. But both of these species are in Grasslands Regional Park, and they make up some of the beautiful blue, or one of the beautiful blue circles that we see when the season is right. Another of the blue flowers is the miniature lupine. This is one of my favorites. It's a very small flower, maybe a quarter of an inch. And again, it's not a tall growing flower. It doesn't need to put a lot of energy into the leaves and the stem. You can see this in slide 52. One of the things that's interesting about the lupines is that once they've been pollinated by a bee, that little white flag that you see, that little white area, turns blue. I'm not sure of the mechanism for it, but I find that fascinating. We're going to walk out and look at some other flowers or some other plants in the pool. We're going to take a look at the blowwives. And perhaps while we're getting these up, the moderator could show the pictures. Then we have that work there. Low wives, and that's the word for both singular and plural. They're very delicate at this stage, and I'm not sure I can get this piece up. There we go. Whoops. What we're looking at here there's also a gold field in there, a very dried up gold field. But the blowwives is the white flower. And those are, what you're seeing are like the head of a dandelion, the puffy part. Those are on top of the seed and they help disperse the seed. The flower of the blowwives, as you may have seen in the slides, is closed, looks a lot like a dandelion. And then this is what it looks like once it's ready to spread its seed and disperse it. This one is a little bit wind blown, but when they're in their full shape, they're a beautiful flower, somewhat like a dandelion, but a bit sturdier. And the slides 31 and 32, perhaps the moderator could bring those up. The next flower we'll look at are the woolly marbles. And it will be obvious why these are called woolly marbles, as that's exactly what they look like. The flowering, well, Sabrina's getting the image. You see the flowering, or the flower in bloom. They're very small, and now what you're seeing are the actual woolly marbles, or the dried up flower. The leaves haven't closed the blossom inside. And these are scattered everywhere along with the dried up gold fields. They should not be confused, however, with the rabbit scat that's out here, the jackrabbit scat, which is quite a bit bigger and a different color. Woolly marbles are endemic to California vernal pools, meaning we find them nowhere else. And the wind is certainly playing marbles with us. We've talked about a number of the plants and some of their dispersal techniques and some of their specialized growing techniques. Now I'd like to talk about some of the animals that we may see out here, aside from the sheep, which are no longer stalking us. As we were setting up this evening, we watched a number of jackrabbits racing over the fields. The jackrabbits that we have here, the black-tailed jackrabbit, are the third largest jackrabbit in North America. They can run, sprint as it were, up to 45 miles an hour. But jackrabbits are different from rabbits. Jackrabbits are hares. Their young are born just in a little scrape on the ground, on the surface of the ground. They're born with their eyes open, fully furred, and ready to go. Very shortly after birth, they can really take off. And the mother doesn't hang around to protect them. She comes back to nurse them, but they're on their own for the rest of the time. That's in contrast to rabbits, which give birth in a burrow or in a den to a baby that looks a lot like a kitten. Not much fur on it, the eyes and the ears are closed, and it takes a lot of attention before it can grow and mature. We've seen some birds flying over us as we've been standing out here. As I was waiting, I was enjoying the view of a Swainson's hawk, which breed up here in the springtime and then spend their winters down in South America. Sometimes you can hear them squealing at each other up in the sky. And on occasion, not in this particular field, but it would not surprise me, on occasion I have driven by fields where there may be 50, 70 of these birds, of the Swainson's hawks, sitting on the ground, standing on the ground, waiting for whatever it is that they're going to eat to show up. It may be a vole or a mouse or a grasshopper. But getting back to the smaller animals that actually live in the pools, I'd like to talk about the fairy shrimp and the tadpole shrimp. These animals have also evolved to meet the challenges of long periods of desiccation, perhaps years of desiccation, perhaps centuries. Because these pools are ephemeral, fish can't live in them. So the invertebrates, they survive fairly well. The tadpole shrimp and the fairy shrimp are some of the most ancient forms of life. And they have a very unique reproductive strategy. Their strategy is to have not just an egg, but to have a cyst. And within the cyst is a miniature fairy shrimp or tadpole shrimp. The cyst is enclosed in a very hard shell and can survive for decades, for centuries, and with great temperature extremes until the right conditions occur when there's enough water, the temperature is right, everything else that the animal wants, it will go ahead and hatch out and be perfectly viable. California is considered a hot spot for fairy shrimp. We have about 43% of all the fairy shrimp in North America living in California, so 24 of 56 species. As I said, they're one of the most primitive of living crustaceans. We have found fossils that are very similar to present-day fairy shrimp in sediment from 400 million years ago. The pool pools dry up, and as I said, the cysts can persist and be viable for a very long time in the sediment. The state of life that they enter. Could the moderator please show the pictures, the picture of the fairy shrimp? I apologize. The state of life, as it were, that the cysts exist in is called cryptobiosis. It's a state of life entered into by an organism in response to an adverse environment. And I certainly think that drying up where you live, it would be considered an adverse environment. All metabolic processes stop. Yet the animal is still alive and will hatch with rain. We know that the cysts of fairy shrimp are extremely hardy. They survive stomach acid when they're eaten by birds. They've gone into space on the shuttle and been subjected to the vacuum and the temperatures in space. And that didn't affect their viability. Some of the fairy shrimp in California are threatened. Hence, their habitat is protected to protect the fairy shrimp. The other creature I would like to talk about are the tadpole shrimp. And the first time I saw one of these, I just fell in love with it. I think they're fantastic little creatures. They do remind me of a horseshoe crab. However, they are not at all related to a horseshoe crab. There are 10 different species of tadpole shrimp on the planet. And we have a couple of them living here in California, one of which is federally listed. So again, the protection of the vernal pool is protecting the habitat for the tadpole shrimp. A tadpole shrimp, we know, have been around without a lot of change at all for 220 million years. They lived alongside the dinosaurs and are considered perhaps the oldest living creature, the oldest living fossil. They have, if you were to flip them over, you could see that they have anywhere from 20 to 30 pairs of legs. I have problems with my 2 legs. I don't know how they managed it with 20 to 30 pairs of legs. They also reproduce by having cysts and laying those in the sediment. We don't have slides, I don't believe, for the jackrabbit. As Sabrina mentioned earlier on in the talk, there is an area out here that is set aside for the burrowing owls. And I believe we do have a picture of the burrowing owl. The moderator could show that. These owls live in burrows, oftentimes made by ground squirrels, and come out. One can see them during the day, sometimes poking their little heads up. They're a very long-legged owl. I believe they tend to come out during dawn and dusk. They're a rather small owl. And I know you have one up there on your screen, and I have one here to show you. They eat anything they can catch, ranges from lizards to small mammals, to anything, as I said, anything they can catch. And I have seen these in places when I've gone birding, sitting up on the fence poles. They have a very cute appearance. We also can see coyote out here, although we've not seen one this evening. It doesn't mean that they're not here. It's just not crossed our vision. So we've talked about the vernal pools from the 50,000 foot level. We've talked about where we find them. We've talked about what creates a vernal pool. And then we've gotten down onto the ground and looked at some of the plants and talked about some of their unique characteristics and specialization for living in this wonderful environment. We dove into the water and talked about two of the fantastic creatures, fantastic, very old creatures that live in these vernal pools. So I hope you will be leaving us at the end of the question time with, as I said, a greater appreciation for this fantastic ecosystem. And now, if there's any questions, please send them to the moderator, and we have time for a few questions.
Wonderful, thank you. So one of the first questions was, how many days did the Grassland Regional Pools or Regional Park vernal pools have water on them this year?
I do not know the answer to that. That's a very good question. Sabrina, do you know?
Yes, they had zero days of water on them this year.
There you go. It was a very, very dry year. I don't think the Mather field pools had much water at all, or flowers either, although I did hear that there was some blooming up on Table Mountain, another area of vernal pools to the northeast of us.
On average, how many days would they normally have standing water?
Again, I will defer that question to Sabrina, who may know the answer.
That's a great question. We don't have a good look at the average number of days that vernal pools typically have water on them. That is research that hasn't been fully conducted. And so that's a great question. It needs to be looked into more. And it really does vary with the rain season, how much rain we get. So it's extremely variable to our knowledge right now. But in terms of an average over the course of years, we don't have that data.
Do you expect with multiple years of drought, would that lead to, when there is a heavy rain season, would that lead to reduced flowers, reduced kind of flower diversity, or would all of the seeds just wait until that point and you'd get a super bloom?
That is an excellent question. I know we had some super blooms a few years ago. Those were not necessarily all in vernal pools. Vernal pools have been around for many, many thousands of years. So the plants have adapted to long periods of drought. Again, we may not have, at least I am not aware of what the research shows, if there is any, on the degree of variation or diversity within a single pool over a period of many years of drought. That would take knowing what the pool looked like 200, 300 years ago, what the cycles are. Again, these are things that have been around for many, many, many years. Going back to the question about how long a pool is wet, my experience with going out to visit Mather in the March and April, I think, is when they usually offer their tours. There's definitely water in the pools at that time, and this was following the rain coming in November, December. The pools were not dried up by any means at that time, so that would be, what, 3-4 months or so. Some of it is certainly going to depend on the size of the depression, as well as the environment and the weather and what's happened.
How long does it do the pools need to be flooded for the invertebrates like the tadpole and fairy shrimp to hatch and reproduce?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear all of that.
How long do the pools need to be flooded for the invertebrates to hatch and reproduce?
Again, another excellent question.
I
I'm
can chime in
trying
for
to
that one if you'd
I'm
like
sorry?
me to. I can chime in for that one. The vernal
Please do.
pool, sure. The vernal pool fairy shrimp. The water has to just be a shallow level of water within, and then it has to hit a certain temperature, which we're not completely sure of that mechanism. Which temperature does it need to hit for it to have that internal signal for them to start being viable? But it really only takes just a little amount of water, and within 3 to 4 days is what has been observed. But in terms of temperature, what is an ideal temperature for that mechanism to kick in? That's still unknown.
Great, thank you. Another question, is our Eryngium perennial?
All of the flowers out here are annuals.
Got it. And let's see some, how much interpool gene flow do you see?
Interpool gene flow?
Yeah, how much gene flow in between, in between one pool and another, or how similar or dissimilar are the species from one to the next?
So that is research that has not been conducted. We do know that species like vernal pool species can be found in different pools because of spread by if there's water flow, if they're moved by water, if they're moved by plants, if they're moved by birds. They can survive like many seeds can, going through a bird's digestive tract and coming out and being left behind in the feces of a bird in another vernal pool, and they're still viable, which is incredible, right? So we know that from observational studies and studies that have documented that, like, oh, this shrimp wasn't previously seen in this vernal pool and now it's here, or the cysts found in bird feces, for example. But in terms of we need more data on that. We need more research to answer the question that you're posing. Great questions. Go get your PhD in vernal pools, right? Lots of great study opportunities here for students.
There are.
A couple more questions here. Do the pools ever get polluted by nearby agricultural crops?
By the crops. That will depend on the location of the pool, what is grown around it. Where we're standing, we have sheep grazing around here, which are actually beneficial. If a pool is not in an agricultural area, and not all of them are, then I would not expect to see a lot of pollution there. In terms of the pollution in an area that is surrounded by agriculture that is using fertilizer, do you know if that work has been done, Sabrina?
So pollution from agriculture, depending on the type of ag that it is, and how they conduct things at their company, yes, it can happen. Pollution can end up in vernal pool habitats. I'm not sure as to how much of that has been documented. That's another great question that we don't know a lot about. You can kind of see that in general, that there's a lot we still don't know about vernal pools. So yeah, these are great questions and we don't have all the answers yet. But yeah, it can impact them for sure if something does leak in, or if something is blown in from people using the area too. So in that sense, right, everything is connected, so it can be impacted, and it just needs to be looked at more.
Okay, a couple more quick questions. Do you know if there's any other bird species that like to hunt or forage around vernal pools, or vernal pool dependent?
I don't know if there's any bird species that is dependent on the vernal pool, but as I'm standing here this evening in this particular grassland habitat, I've seen killdeer, I've heard Sternella neglecta.
Also waterfowl,
Waterfowl, correct.
ducks and geese will feed on the invertebrates that are in vernal pools.
And I would imagine that there are a great many sparrows out in the grasslands. That's a typical place to find sparrows. So whether they're dependent actually on the vernal pool itself, the waterfowl certainly use it and may certainly graze on some of the plants that are there. But they're so ephemeral, and not present every year, would not be a good strategy for a bird, a good survival strategy for a bird to rely solely on a vernal pool.
And last question, I believe, are burrowing owls a threatened species?
Yes, burrowing owls are a threatened species.
Okay, I think
So there is a burrowing owl preserve, which is actually just, let's see if you can, so just off to the north west of where we're standing. You can kind of see where the tree line gets a little higher there in the distance. Pretty just in front of that is the burrowing owl preserve.
Okay.
Are there any more questions for Catherine or myself?
I think that's all I'm seeing. Definitely got some praise and thanks.
Great. Well, we want to thank you all for joining us this evening. We hope to get you out into the vernal pools out here at Grasslands Regional Park in person next vernal pool season, and hopefully with more rain, we can see some more of those blooms. Since it wasn't a spectacular year out here for Grasslands Regional Park and many of the vernal pools throughout California with less water. So we'll hopefully be able to do that for you next year. Just want to remind you that our Bat Talk and Walk program tickets are currently on sale. Those are popular, they go fast. So get online at yolobasin.org/bats and buy your tickets now. They do sell out. They tend to sell out in just a few weeks. So hop on that. We also have our wetland tours of the City of Davis wetlands that are available, and those are back in person. So those are the first Saturday of every month through the summer. And then in the fall again, we'll pick up with our wetland tours of the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area as well. If you have kids in the family, we've got summer camp going as well. There's just a handful of spots left in our summer camps. They're back in person, so we're excited to have everybody out here with us again. Thank you all so much. Have a great evening. Good night.